All right, we're back. Today I'm going to be watching something that came in from a request. Someone reminded me that like a while ago, I think maybe 2 years, a year and a half. A while ago, I was listening to this talk by David Lewis, um, speaking at Trobe University on what experience teaches, where he gives his famous a talk on, then turns into a paper. I guess he's reading the paper here actually, but it gets published as what experience teaches, his response to the knowledge argument. So I had made it about halfway through and forgot about it. I get caught up in these things. And then I was asking people what I should be doing. Someone said, don't forget to go back and finish the rest of that. So, okay, it turns out it's right where I left it. So that'll be cool. Um, I have a link to the original video downstairs with my fresh haircut. Oh, it's over here. Look, there it is. So I had to figure out where I left off and make sure this was right. He was, going through his 3 ways to miss a point or whatever. There's like 5 ways, and there's 4 more ways. Okay, anyway, so there's a lot of stuff he goes through here. But let's just jump right back in and see. I remember the audio was low. So let's see.
Third, information is a matter of the elimination of possibilities. If you lack information, several possibilities are open. And when you get the information, some of those alternatives...
Right, so he's talking about phenomenal information, what Mary learns, and what it is and isn't, and stuff like that. So here's his view on information as eliminating possibilities. So if you think of like a space of possible worlds, if you don't know anything, then anything could be the case. Once you start knowing some stuff, then certain possibilities are eliminated about being true about the physical world. Okay, so information tells you, limits which way the world could be. You might like these terms. You could say you could go from what's epistemically possible to what's metaphysically possible by getting information about the world. Whereas epistemically possible means for all you know it could be the case. And metaphysically possible means something like it could have been the case, like it's a real possibility for the way the world is.
Are excluded. The information you get can be thought of as the information that the possibility that's realized is...
The highest art is beautiful.
If you lack information, several possibilities are open. And when you get the information, some of those alternatives are excluded. The information you get can be thought of as the information that the possibility that's realized is one of these ones, not one of those ones. Now, mathematical and logical information, if there is such a thing, might turn out to be an exception. And that's annoying, given a general account of information in terms of possibilities. But at any rate, if it is an exception, it's a completely irrelevant exception.
Yeah, the reason why it's an exception is because it will be true in all possibilities, so it doesn't exclude any. 1 plus 1 being 2 is going to be true in every logically possible world, according to some people. And we don't talk about impossible worlds, which some people don't like, and blah, blah, so that's a different issue. But so you have to give a different account of what mathematical truth would be if you're someone like Lewis, who thinks that information is a matter of ruling out possibilities.
It's plain that when you get to know what it's like to smell the skunk, you don't do it by getting better at mathematics and logic. You don't, if there is any such thing as mathematical and logical information which can't be explained in terms of excluded and admitted possibilities, that's not the same thing as this mysterious phenomenal information.
Yeah, obviously.
But when we don't know what it's like to have an experience, where are the alternative open possibilities? I cannot present to myself in thought a range of alternative hypotheses about what it might be like to taste Vegemite.
So you can't think, oh, it might be like this and this and this, and then taste the Vegemite or pineapple or whatever it is you've never had before, and then go, it is this one that I have thought. So it's like you can't entertain the possibilities beforehand in a way that you can with other things. Okay, so we get the point.
I can't imagine 7 different tastes unlike anything I ever tasted before and wonder which one it is. I cannot imagine either what it is like to taste Vegemite or any alternative way that it might be like, but in fact isn't. With the exception of the hypotheses that it might taste just like something I'm already familiar with.
Or a little bit like something you're more familiar with. So I wonder if you can get like a missing shade of blue type of case for taste. Hume's missing shade of blue. You line up all the shades of blue with one missing. A person only gets to see those ones, and you ask, could he know about the missing one? Hume thinks maybe he could. So okay, but we get it. We take his point, all right. So there's going to be a certain sort of information you can only get from the experience, which is what he's trying to say, I think.
I've been authoritatively told this very afternoon that that isn't so. The only thing that tastes anything like Vegemite is something called Marmite, and I've never tasted that either. So I cannot even pose the question that phenomenal information is supposed to answer. I can't pose the question, is it this way or is it that way? Now you might think that while I can't pose the...
Can't you though? Can you... Can you ask if it's a little bit like... I don't know, I've never had Vegemite either, but is it a little bit like tasting an orange, or is it a little bit like a stinky cheese, or is there no way you can kind of form the question, what is it like for you? I think maybe this is too austere, but we still get the point that he's making. It's like it's something interesting, unique about this kind of information.
Question beforehand, I can afterwards. Afterwards, I can think of a range of alternative possibilities, and I can say, it turned out to be this way. Maybe I'd better taste some other new things, too. Here are 7 new experiences, and it turns out that what it's like to taste Vegemite is this one of them, not any of the other ones. This is something like the thought that actually, when we see red, we have one experience, call it experience 1, and when we see green, we have another, call it experience 2, but it might possibly have been that when we see green, we have experience 1, and when we see red, we have experience 2. There are the alternative possibilities. Well, I don't think that will do the trick.
Okay, so that's the color inversion thought experiment, where what I call red is what you might call green, even though we agree on all the color terms. So well known. I think Locke is one of the first people to introduce this in philosophy. Amongst a couple other thought experiments, but so this isn't the same. This isn't the type of this question isn't this getting at what are the range of possibilities which you're excluding by learning about what it's like according to Lewis, because you got well. We'll let him say it, but we sort of know what the punchline is already. Some have to do with the they sayness of it. That's about me.
agree that there are those alternative possibilities. Well, I don't think that will do the trick. I agree that there are those alternative possibilities, but it seems to me we can explain these alternative possibilities without any phenomenal differences between physically, or as it might be parapsychologically, similar cases. Something goes on in me when I see red things, something else goes on in me when I see green things. That's uncontroversial. Whatever you think goes on in you...
By the way, that way of talking, the something goes on in me when I see green things, comes from the kind of like J.C. Smart identity theorist camps, where they're talking about trying to give a topic neutral description of these brain states that doesn't invoke phenomenal concepts or consciousness itself. So they're trying to say, well, pick these states out in a way that's neutral. So then it open the question is what goes on in you, like physical or non-physical, having these other properties or whatever. So it's supposed to be this way of splitting the difference in between them. Lewis, of course, is going to argue that our folk psychology, our ordinary conception of how the mind works, has some implications that can't all be true. And so, therefore, we have to kind of pick, we have to sort of make most of them true, as many of them as we can, or common sense platitudes about the mind and stuff like that, but not all of them, so to speak. So the trick for the Lewis approach is to try to say, well, look, the first step is you talk about what the mind is, you give a kind of functional analysis of it, and the second step is you look around here to see what plays that functional analysis. So that's in the background of this is his views about the way the theoretical identities in the mind sciences should go, and he thinks they should go the way they go in the other sciences, and according to him, this is the way they go. So he's very much on the side of the Canberra plan, as it's called sometimes, by people like David Chalmers and other people who like it, this idea that, there is a compact set of truths from which all the other truths follow. Lewis is very much on board with this kind of model. Okay, anyway, so let's get back to it, though.
When you see red things and when you see green things, and whether or not there's a phenomenal aspect to it, it's at any rate true that something goes on in you when you see red things and something goes on in you when you see green things. Now, I think that roughly speaking, that we can define the experience of seeing red as that which goes on in you when you see red things, the experience of green as that which goes on in you when you see green things. If so...
So, some people might think that's too quick, since those things can go on in you when they're unconscious. And I don't mean to invoke zombies or anything in that debate, but just that you might have subliminal. So maybe he means what goes on in you when you consciously see red or something like that. But that's sort of okay. You have to add that. You can't just say it goes on in you when you see red, I think.
Then there is certainly a possibility that the experience that goes on in you when you see red things, in fact, might have rather been the experience that goes on in you when you see green things. Or if it's correct to define experiences in the way suggested, that the experience, that which is actually the experience of red might have been the experience of green instead. That's a possibility, all right. And I think it seems fair to call it the possibility that red might have produced a different experience from the one it actually does, but it seems to me I've given an account of this difference of possibilities without ever needing any phenomenal differences. So, if there are alternative possibilities for the phenomenal aspect that cut across the physical and the parapsychological, if such there be, then they are something else. So I still can't find them. To sum up the case against the phenomenal information hypothesis, I say again, it's a case that the hypothesis is strange and peculiar, not a case that refutes it decisively. Phenomenal information is strangely isolated from all other sorts of information, and it is so regardless of whether the mind works on physical or parapsychological principles. Phenomenal facts have nothing to do with explaining.
Wait, now I'm wondering, is this where I left off? Because, yeah, he has this idea that even if you had a Mary in the new room who knew all the, like, parapsychological, meaning non-physical truths about consciousness, she still would learn something when she saw red for the first time. Did I cover that last time? Now I'm wondering. Anyway, okay, so that's a good point, and I like
why
it.
people seemingly talk about phenomenal facts. For instance, they play no part at all in explaining the movements of the pens of philosophers writing treatises about their introspective acquaintance with phenomenal facts. Further, phenomenal information is almost unique in the way it resists treatment in terms of the elimination of alternative possibilities. It would be nice, and not only for materialists, if we didn't have to believe in it, and we don't. 3, the ability hypothesis. If you have...
Okay, so now we're finally at this point where, so what is he... So we don't have to believe in phenomenal information is the big punchline of all of this stuff, and by which he means that when Mary comes out of her black and white room, remember, she's been locked in this room, she's never seen red before, she knows all the science about the brain and physics, colors, and so forth, and how the brain responds. She comes out, she looks at the tomato. She learns something. That's what Lewis is saying. There's definitely something going on here that you could call learning. But is it learning information? Is it a proposition? Is it a fact? Is it in that category of things? Which, if it were, then you might think, some people might say, that's a problem because Mary's supposed to know all the physical facts, all the physical information. So if there is another class of facts, another class of information, then maybe it's not physical, and therefore the argument succeeds. So Lewis is trying to, in this past section, which I'm wondering if I skipped it a bit. But anyway, we've read the paper before. I've never heard him speak, honestly, but this paper is well known. So what he's trying to suggest is, look, she's not going to learn information because it's kind of weird. Like, what is information? First of all, it eliminates possibilities. This one doesn't seem to do so. And so you can sort of explain the intuitions that people have with color inversion scenarios and so forth without appealing to talking about information in the sense of a fact or something over and above the physical stuff. That's what that business about the red in the brain. So if you imagine seeing red in us produces brain state, call it brain state R, and you imagine some other possible world where brain state G is produced by things in the environment, which we would call red. So red roses produce brain state G, but by some fluke, everyone there calls it red, and so forth and so on. Then you might say their red is our green, and that's a coherent possibility, but you don't have to talk about some weird new information. So that's what's going on here in the dialectic overall of the discussion. And the next section introduces what he thinks is going on here, which is that what she learns is not a, well, everybody hopefully already knows this, it's not a fact or something that would conflict with physicalism, but according to Lewis, it's an ability, a skill that she acquires, which is, I guess, how to re-identify or how to recognize. People catch this out in a lot of ways, but I forget what Lewis's specific way is, but he's going to tell us. So let's go ahead and jump into that.
New experience, smell the skunk or taste the
Wait, hold on.
hypothesis. And we don't. 3, the ability hypothesis. If you have a new experience, smell the skunk or taste the Vegemite, you come to know what it's like, whatever that means. But that isn't the only thing that happens. You also gain abilities. You can recognize the experience if you have it again. You can remember having it. You can imagine having it. And you can also imagine having related experiences that you never did have. Tasting Vegemite ice cream, for instance. By performing imaginative experiments, you can predict with some reliability what you would do in circumstances that have never arisen. Or if they're going to arise tomorrow, then you have a way of foretelling the future, which isn't open to you if you don't know what the experience is like. Perhaps you can predict that you'd ask for a second helping of Vegemite ice cream. I can't say, not knowing what it would be like. These are abilities that you can't gain, barring magic or brain surgery, except by having the experience that imparts them to you. And in particular, you cannot get these abilities...
Sorry, David, but I think that's a point he made earlier in the paper, which was that experience isn't the only way to get these, it's just the usual way. So you could like have the neuroscientists change your brain to put it exactly in the state of seeing red or whatever, or magic could be real and they could click their fingers and then it would pop into your head. So, but the only practical way that we know of now is by looking at red things. So, okay, good.
By taking lessons on the physics or the parapsychology of the experience in question. Or even by taking comprehensive lessons that cover the whole of physics and parapsychology. And I don't just mean the whole of the part that's known today. I mean the whole truth in those subjects. My hypothesis is that knowing what an experience is like just is the possession of these abilities to recognize and remember and imagine. It isn't the possession of any kind of information, ordinary or peculiar. It isn't the knowledge that certain possibilities are unrealized. It isn't knowing that, it's knowing how. An old distinction in philosophy, going back at least to Gilbert Ryle, but I think just the medicine for the present problem.
I mean, this is itself a whole can of worms. Some people have argued that knowing how is a species of knowing that. Like if you know how to ride a bike, you know that you should like position yourself in a certain way, blah, blah. So I don't know about those debates, but some people will find that counterintuitive. But notice what his solution here is supposed to be is that when you say that Mary knows what it's like to see red, what you're saying is that Mary has all of these abilities. She can imagine, predict, etc. And everybody, I guess, kind of agrees that you then come to have those abilities. The question is whether, and I guess that the way that the people who are friendly to the dualist side of things typically respond is by questioning whether this really is what it's like, what it means to know what it's like when you're having the experience and you're forming a direct phenomenal concept of it, right? And this is what it's like to see red. This is what it's like to see red, you think to yourself, having the experience right in front of you. That seems different than an ability. It seems like thinking a thought with a certain concept. Interesting. Okay, but all these debates are well known. So, but if that's all there is to knowing what it's like, it's just having these abilities. Interesting. Okay.
There are plenty of parallel cases. Some people know how to wiggle their ears. Other people don't. And if you can't do it, no amount of information will help. Some people know how to eat with chopsticks. Others don't. If this is like an academic audience at home, it's probably about 50-50. Information will help up to a point.
So he knew this was being recorded. Academic audience at home. Who did he think was going to be hearing this? What year was this? 81? Academic. Oh, he meant at home, like back in Australia? Okay, anyway.
For instance, if your trouble is that you hold one chopstick in each hand, but no amount of information by itself will bring you to a very high level of know-how. Some people know a C-38 locomotive by sight. Others don't. If you don't, it wouldn't help, or at least it wouldn't help much, if you memorized a detailed description in geometrical terms of its shape. Its shape is regular enough that you could describe it in geometrical terms, and the description would be short enough to memorize if your life depended on memorizing it. But it wouldn't help you recognize one. It wouldn't help you much. It would help you some. For instance, you could recognize from the geometrical description that some parts of it are high up and hemispherical, and you could eliminate some candidates on that. But you wouldn't get the Gestalt. That would be something else. Conversely, knowing the shape by sight doesn't enable you to write down the geometrical description. I know the shape by sight, but in order to write down the geometrical description, I'd really have to measure one, or take a photograph and measure that, or draw shapes at random until I got it right, and then measure the drawing I'd made. Information doesn't suffice for know-how. Information contributes to know-how in most cases, but it often doesn't contribute enough. That's why music students have to practice. Of course, there are some aspects of ability which are not in any sense knowledge. Some aspects.
What's happening here?
Of course, there are some aspects of ability which are not in any sense knowledge.
I don't know what just happened, but
Some aspects of ability are not knowing that, they aren't possession of information, and they aren't knowing how either. For instance, strength. Nobody who once knew how to, some athletic feat, fails to know how when he loses his strength. Sufficient funds for another. If you lose your money, there are things you're no longer able to do, but you haven't stopped knowing how to do anything that you knew how to do before. And of course, some aspects of ability are purely and simply a matter of possessing information. If you want to know how to open the combination lock at the bank, information is all you need. It remains that there are aspects of ability that we do call knowledge, and that do not consist simply of possession of information. I suppose, roughly, skill. It isn't just a pun. Even if there are two distinct senses of the word know, a knowing how sense and a knowing that sense, these senses are closely related, and they are well and truly entangled. We do so often gain information and ability together that perhaps the pure cases of one or the other are the exception. If so, it should be no surprise if we apply to both sorts of pure cases the same word that we apply more commonly to the mixed cases. In fact, the mixture is more complicated. There's a third element to the mixture, acquaintance. Father can't get to know Lloyd George, for Lloyd George died before Father ever had the chance. No amount of information will do the trick. Father may be an extremely thorough biographer, and the archives may be very complete. Is there some special information about someone that you can only get when you're in his presence? Know-how won't do it either. Father may be very good at imagining Lloyd George, seemingly remembering him, recognizing him. Incidentally, the ability to recognize is something that could exist even though the one to be recognized is dead and gone. Because...
Yeah, obviously. So you see what he's doing here is like he's trying to address the kind of criticism that I brought up already earlier, which was this kind of direct phenomenal concept. There's the experience. That's what it's like to see red when you're pointing at it or somehow grabbing it with your introspective abilities. And he's gearing up to his takedown of this idea.
Father, after studying photographs, has the ability to recognize Lloyd George. Then if he were to turn up, returned from the dead, Father could indeed tell that it was him. Likewise, I believe that I possess the ability to recognize certain classes of locomotives that all went to the scrapyard long before I was born.
Yeah, wasn't he obsessed with trains? He really liked trains, right? Or am I making that up? Quine liked to point out like where he flew, which cities he flew over or something. He liked trains. Someone likes stamps too. I forget why we know these things, but I think we do.
By looking at pictures. Again, it isn't a pun. It isn't just that knowing sometimes means possessing information and sometimes means having the skill to do things, mental things or others, and sometimes means being in the presence of, in the way that a bank sometimes means a maneuver by an airplane and sometimes means a gradient on the railway. Meeting someone, gaining a lot of information about him that would be hard to gain in any other way, gaining abilities regarding him, usually go together. The pure cases are the exceptions. They're possible, and the possibility of pure cases was what made our problem. How can it be that no amount of information would enable you to know what it's like to be a bat or to smell a skunk? All the same, just because the mixed cases are common, you shouldn't be surprised if the same word applies to pure cases that are pure instances of one element of the mixture and pure cases that are pure cases of another. So in short, I propose there's no special, isolated, phenomenal information. Again, I say this is neither here nor there on the question of whether there's a special kind of parapsychological information. That's a separate question on which I also have views, but they're irrelevant to our topic. Rather,
notice that here's David Lewis's way of saying that the knowledge argument isn't about physicalism versus dualism. He thinks the argument equally undermines dualists because what it's really about is this ability hypothesis stuff. Okay.
Our abilities. No materialist needs to be in the least embarrassed if it turns out that gaining a lot of information isn't a way of gaining abilities. Why should it be? Suppose you have a device which works...
Did he really give an argument against the Acquaintance view, though? Did I miss it? What was his point? That when you have the acquaintance, you get the abilities. Okay, but that doesn't mean that knowing what it's like is just having those abilities. They're an important part of it, but they're entangled with the acquaintance part. I must have missed something.
Like this. It has two parts. One part is a large repository of information. It is a sort of a smart data bank, one that is capable of pulling things out in answer to questions, and one that's capable of doing a certain amount of reasoning about what's there explicitly so as to find things that are there implicitly. But this gadget does something else too. It's a pattern recognizer. And the way it works as a pattern recognizer is when you present it with a certain instance of a pattern, it prepares a matching template. And when you present it with future patterns, it takes out its template and tries it on to see if it fits. And also, perhaps, it can get out its template and do things with it even when there isn't a new pattern to be tried out. Perhaps some of the same machinery is used in the data bank part and the pattern recognizer part, maybe the same central processor, or maybe not, who cares? Now, a machine which is a combination smart data bank cum pattern recognizer, something like a combination calculator and electric alarm clock, might be given a third capacity. It might be possible to fix it up so that in addition to doing the two things that I said it could do, it could also build templates for the pattern recognizer part out of the information stored in the data bank part. But that would be a new third ability. It's no part of the two abilities that I already said it had. Perhaps we're like that. Perhaps we're like the machine that has a data bank part and a pattern recognizer part with templates, but has little or no power to make templates for the pattern recognizer part on the basis of the information in the data bank part. Well then, it would be a mistake to say that the templates are after all part of the data bank, but they're a very strange part used for storing data of a very strange kind that can't ordinarily be put there. There's a sense in which they contain information, something more like the usual information theoretic sense than I've been using. But you don't exclude any more possibilities about the way the world is by having an extra template available than you did before. So, in summary, it's true that there are things that you can learn from experience, but not from lessons. That can't be denied. But the knowledge is know-how, it isn't possession of information, and therefore it is quite unnecessary to believe in a very strange sort of information which it's the possession of.
Well, so are there going to be questions? Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, so I don't think, I mean, from my point of view, I don't like this ability hypothesis as a way to debunk the knowledge argument, because I don't really think it captures the central idea of what phenomenal knowledge is. I wonder if anyone's going to bring that up, but there's definitely a venerable, respectable approach. Are there still people who like the ability hypothesis as a way to debunk the knowledge argument? I don't know. So this is going on long enough. So let me stop this here. You tell me. Are there? And I'll come back and I want to check out the question and answer period.